Okay, so we're going to have some fun as we start out tonight, okay? I have this theory about life and big crowds, if you will, that almost at any time in any crowd, anyone can start a chant. Okay, I believe it. So I want to just kind of try this out a little bit, okay? And then I'm going to tell you guys a funny story, all right? So I want you to repeat after me, and I want you to chant with me, okay? Ready? Are you guys ready? Ready? We're just testing this because it's going to get bigger, okay, later on, okay? C-I-Y. 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 Okay, great, awesome. You guys did amazing. You are totally ready. See, you can start a chant anywhere. And not just because I'm on stage, because lest you think that's the only place I've started chants, friends. I've started chants many places. So I don't know what kind of person you are in your friend group, but I've kind of always been the kind of person, better or for worse, that will take a dare if it means that I get people to laugh or have fun or make a memory, right? Some of you guys, you are the dumb dare takers in the room that have done some dumb things for the sake of a laugh, right? So that's me, and almost 10 years ago, my husband and I and two of our closest friends went to a Michigan versus Northwestern game. I want to show you a picture just to prove we were there. My husband is a huge Michigan fan, and I know some of you guys are like, whoa, Ohio State, yeah. Yeah, okay, so here's the thing, I don't care. It's not shade on any of you, I just super don't care. But the thing is that I married a really big college sports person. And so I am every fan's worst nightmare. I am a bandwagon person, so I love Kyle, therefore I love Michigan, and I say, go Michigan, and I buy the shirts. That's me. And so we're at this Michigan game, and what you guys need to know is that I was a football cheerleader in high school. However, as it turns out, you don't need to know much about football to be a football cheerleader. You do need to know how to do a backflip and not let people die and catch them. Don't need to know about football. It doesn't take much to say, go, Bears, go. You can say it at any time. It's relevant at any time of the game. And so I don't know much about football, so when I go to these games, I was the stereotypical I don't know, somebody tell me what to do. I know a little bit more now. So I was like, you know what? I am here for the festivities, the popcorn, the marching band. I love all of that, and I'm going to start some chants. So my friend Nate, who is also kind of just a rowdy person like me, I'm like, hey, Nate, I want to start some chants, but I don't really know what to say because I don't know what's going on. So you tell me what to say. And I trust him. So he's like, all right. And he starts out kind of small, He's like, Michigan. And so I'm like, okay. So I start it, and everybody around me is like, Michigan, and I'm like, yeah. And then it's like, defense. I'm like, okay, yes, there you go. Yes, that's right. It's very easy to start that chant. Yep, okay. And so I start, so I start that, and then I'm like, all right, this gets a little boring, Nate. Give me something weird. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna say something very weird, and I want you to say it. And I'm like, deal. And so he says, I want you to chant, it's time to pay the price. Now, what you guys need to know about this game is there was no price to be paid, okay? Michigan was winning by so much. They always won against Northwestern. There was no rivalry. Nobody was confused about what was going to happen at this game. So it's time to pay the price from a person in a Michigan shirt at Northwestern. Wasn't relevant to what was happening. But I was like, I'm going for it. And so I just start yelling, it's time to pay the price. You guys say it with me? It's time to pay the price. That's right. Awesome. You did it. And so I start yelling. Only Nate and a couple of confused people were like, it's time to pay the price. And somebody in front of me honestly got so annoyed they just left the section, which that's between them and God. But I was like, all right. But the thing is that we are very easily influenced people, right? Easily swayed. Now, some of you just now were like, well, I'm not, and I'm not the kind of person that chants. But I bet you are easily swayed and influenced by other things, even with your arms crossed and arms folded. Because see, what I think that a lot of us miss is that we are being discipled all the time. When I say discipled, I really just mean influenced, led, formed, shaped. The original meaning of the word disciple really is a learner. And I think we are learning all the time, not just when we're intentionally reading our Bibles in church with our church friends. We are being discipled, we are being formed when we're on our phones, when we're scrolling TikTok, when we're with our friends, Jesus followers or not. We are being formed and shaped. What we read, the content we take in, who we admire, who we want to be, it is all shaping us all the time. And so I just want to ask you as we get going tonight, and you don't need to answer me out loud, just think to yourself, who or what is discipling you? Really? Who or what is shaping who you are? Like actually, not just like, well, Jesus, but truly. Who or what voices guide your life? Who leads you? And I ask you that because I think it's really important that you know the answer to that question honestly as we dig into this text tonight. See, tonight we're going to be in John chapter 10, and this really is a leadership conversation. Jesus is talking with the Pharisees in this text, who are the religious leaders, about leadership and the kind of leader he is versus who they are. And all week we've been in the Gospel of John, and John wrote his gospel in a time of intense persecution and suffering, and he wanted to portray that Jesus was worth following, that he could be trusted, you could have your confidence in him, even in the worst of circumstances. And in John chapter 10, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees about who his people, who he refers to as sheep, are influenced by, who leads them, whose voices matter to them. And usually when people walk through John chapter 10, just to be straight with you guys, a lot of people will talk a lot about how dumb sheep are. Like that'll be a big portion of talking about John 10. The thing is I don't actually think I need to do that tonight, right? Like I think we all kind of know that sheep are dumb, right? Like I don't think anyone's like, you know what animal I think is really smart? Sheep, I think we know. And it is true that Jesus also compares us to sheep. So it's a little hurtful, Jesus, but I think we all kind of know this about sheep. There was a story back in 2005 of an entire herd of Turkish sheep, almost 1,600 sheep. One of them fell off the edge of the cliff, and all of them followed. And some of you are like, oh. Here's the darker part of that story, okay? The 400 of them that went first cushioned the blow. They all died, and the other sheep all lived. They all went off the cliff together, and some of you are like, sheesh, sheep. Oh, we're sheep. We're sheep, right? That took nothing, right? And you're like, dang, that is a mean story. But you just did that like instantaneously, and you chanted, it's time to pay the price with me for no reason. So let's not get too judgmental, So I'm not going to spend my time talking about sheep because honestly, we all live amongst ourselves. We know how silly we are. Tonight, I want to talk to you about the shepherd and the door. Because in this passage, Jesus compares himself to both. And what you believe about Jesus being the shepherd and the door can change your life forever. And not just in one night, but every day the rest of your life. So let's hop in, and I want you guys to turn to John chapter 10. If you don't have your Bible with you, we'll have it on the screen. But even better, right in front of you. I want to read verses 1 through 10 for us as we get going.
Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again says to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So what's Jesus talking about here? When most of us think of sheep and shepherds, we think of probably green pastures and sweet little baby sheep, but that's not this. The context here is that Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, those who were obsessed with the law, who wanted to garment themselves in a way that let everyone know how important they were, and a group of people that took something well-intentioned to a place it never should have gone. What you also should know is that in this time right here, this was a politically loaded and charged environment. See, the scene would have been pretty tense because between the Old Testament and here, there's 400 years of silence from God. And during this time in history, Alexander the Great conquered the world and took over the Jewish community. And Alexander's vision was to conquer people both through the military and through culture. He wanted Greek culture to take over everywhere. So why do I tell you that? Not just because my husband's a history teacher and it's like a random fact. I tell you because that's what the people were looking for in Jesus. They wanted him to be the kind of leader to take over in that way, in that power move. And here, Jesus describes himself as a door and a shepherd. Wasn't really the kind of power that they were looking for. And so notice in the first verse, Jesus talks about bringing in the sheep into the sheepfold. I don't know if any of you really know what that is. If you do, awesome. I did not. I'm from the suburbs. And the sheepfold, in the wilderness in the ancient Near East, if the sheep were exposed at night, they would be so very vulnerable. So shepherds would bring them into these sheepfolds to keep them safe. I want to just show you a picture of what this looked like. They'd bring them into the sheepfold to keep them safe, and their primary role was to protect them from hostile animals and other intruders like wolves or even people. So the shepherd's primary role is to guard the sheep, and you can see where the walls are to keep them in. And he's establishing that he is the kind of shepherd that not only guards them, but is the door. Because shepherds were also known to lay in the door to guard and protect all the sheep in that opening. Notice also Jesus mentions the constant presence of a thief and a robber. And look at what the thief's goal is in verse 10. It is to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And then he also says that anyone who came before him is a liar and a thief. Like, no wonder Jesus was crucified. What do thieves do? They cross legitimate boundaries set up to guard and protect with the intent to steal, to kill, or to destroy. And I think it can be really easy to be like, yeah, I'm not really tracking though of like, what does this have to do with me right here, right now in 2021? Well, actually, I think it has a lot to do with us. Because I think there are two primary ways that the enemy works in our lives where he hops over that wall into our own hearts and minds. The first is self-righteousness. I think the enemy works in powerful ways through our own self-righteousness. And when I say self-righteousness, I just mean when you think you're better than anyone else. When you think you've got life figured out on your own, that no sin can touch you, that you are better, bigger, stronger, you're good. And see, the Pharisees that he's talking to viewed themselves this way. They saw themselves as the gold standard. And because self-righteousness is the default mode of the human heart, what started for them as a desire to serve God led them to a place of thinking they were above other people, and they kept creating laws after laws, and most of their laws were inaccessible to people on the margins because they were too hard to grasp. People didn't make enough money to take that much time off of work in the way they wanted them to, or to eat the kinds of foods they wanted them to eat. And some of you maybe know the kind of person that I'm talking about that thinks they are better and bigger. And maybe you know them because you've been hurt by them, or if you're really honest, you are one of those people. Where you think, I'm good. I got what I need. And the thing is that Jesus tells them, you are stealing, killing, and destroying people. See, if you don't think Jesus can be angry, you have the wrong Jesus. If you're overwhelmed by shame you've experienced by a person like this, just know that Jesus is more angry about that. The second way that I think the enemy hops over that wall into our lives is through rebellion. James 1, verse 13 through 15 describes rebellion as someone who is tempted, and that temptation leads to desire, and that desire leads to sin, and that sin leads to death. And I think that order of things is so interesting because when we're tempted, we don't often know we're moving to desire. And when we're desiring something, we don't often know we're moving into sin. And when we're in sin, we don't often know we're moving toward death, spiritual death, emotional death, relational death, until we're there. Have any of you seen the documentary, The Fire Festival? Anybody see that? It's a weird documentary. I don't know that I recommend it. It's not like my endorsement per se. But I think The Fire Festival is a perfect example of the way that James describes sin. See, if you watched it, it was back in 2017, a guy named Billy fooled a bunch of people into buying tickets to a music festival that was advertised to be the most incredible music festival they'd ever experienced, and it was particularly targeted toward young people. And so on the left here, see that blue, beautiful water? That was what was marketed to people, and they brought in celebrities and did tons of marketing, brought in all these bands, and were like, it's gonna be the best week of your life. You're gonna go home married probably, and you're gonna have an amazing time. But on the right is what everyone showed up to. It was a dumpster fire. Seriously, it was awful. And it was advertised to be gourmet food, accommodation, tons of celebrities, and this was the kind of food that people got. You ready for this? Listen, you sign up for gourmet food, and that, I know, you're like, that is gross. It is. Right? They're thinking they're gonna get these 5-star accommodations, and they show up to this. And Billy is now in prison for 6 years for fraud and theft. But before we get high and mighty and are like, well, I would never buy that ticket. Those people are stupid, right? Remember, you guys all chanted, it's time to pay the price with me, okay? But also, we do this all the time. I think it's the perfect picture of how the thief and robber works in our lives, but maybe just a little bit slower. See, all of that was an illusion of look how great life can be. Look how amazing life can be. And that looks like us sometimes, where the thief lies and tells us it's gonna be awesome, and then we move to desire and we buy the tickets, and we show up and we find ourselves surrounded by loneliness, broken relationships, and we realize that we bought tickets to sin and to an illusion of a great life apart from God. And that life leaves us feeling empty. But Jesus offers us all a way to the abundant life, himself. In Jesus' description of himself as the door and the shepherd, he shares that there are three things that will happen when he becomes both of those things in our lives. First, let's look at verse 3. We see that we will listen to his voice and we will know that voice. Shepherds have an incredible relationship with their sheep. There was a story in the 1980s of an officer in charge of a village in Palestine, and this village confiscated all the sheep in that town. And the soldier who was in charge was confronted by this woman who came up. She was a widow. The sheep were her livelihood. And she's like, "Sir, I need my sheep back. Please, I'll do anything." And he turns around and is like, "Well, what do you want me to do? Like, look at all these sheep. Like, how do you know who's even yours? You know, there's thousands of sheep in here. They're not marked. I can't tell who's yours." And he says, "Okay, if you can get them out of here, I will give them to you. If you can get yours out, I will give them to you." So her son shows up. It's a true story. And he has a little flute, and he plays their little song. And all of her sheep are like, "Bah, that's our song," and they leave. And they follow them out. They follow them home. Because they had spent so much time together in that sea of sheep, they were able to know and to be known. And that is the illustration that Jesus gives about us. We all have voices in our heads that are trying to get to us, and our heads can get so loud. And some of you right now are on paths that you hate because you think you have no option. You've already gone down that road, and so you might as well just keep going. And the voice of the shepherd would say, "Turn back around, follow me." Some of you have entered into relationships with people that you know are bad for you, but you've believed the lie that you're unlovable. So the first person who came and looked at you twice, you latched onto. And they make you feel like death, but at least it's someone that you think loves you. And the shepherd's voice would say, "I love you. Turn around. Come back to me. You don't have to be with that person." Some of you have believed that your whole life has to be about making money. And no matter what you do, you've just got to make as much money as you can, be as successful as you can, be as famous as you can. And Jesus' voice would say, No. I'll take care of you. Turn around. Come back to me." See, his flute call is one that says, nothing you do or don't do can earn my love. And Jesus comes along and says, when you hear my voice and experience my love, it should be the loudest in your life. Leave it all behind and follow me. The second thing that happens when Jesus becomes our door and shepherd, again in verse 3, is he knows us by name and leads us. He leads us. Jesus says he'll know his sheep, call them by name, lead them out, and they will follow. See, God calling us by name, knowing every hair on our head, speaks to his power. As a matter of fact, if you were to look back at John chapter 1, the very first words that Jesus speaks in verse 38 of that chapter, he just asks, "What do you want?" What do you want? And often what we want, the answer to what we're really looking for, is where we can find the ways that the enemy has tempted us, if we want to be powerful and in control. In Psalm 23, when David describes the Lord as our shepherd, he says, "I shall not want." See, to the degree that you and I find ourselves wanting more and more, we are refusing God to tend to our desires. In our humanity, we long and we long and we long, and we will grab for everything and anything we can possibly get our hands on that makes us feel satisfied. And Jesus asks and knows what we want. And he alone can fulfill those needs. So where does he lead us? Where are we going? There's this verse in Psalm 23 that I think speaks to the shepherd's care of the sheep, but unfortunately we often miss it because we don't know what history is going on here. And when David says, "You anoint my head with oil." See, the shepherd would anoint the sheep's head with oil. Because in the summertime, there were these things called nasal flies, and they were these little tiny, I know it's gross, and some of you are going to be like, ugh, don't talk about this. There are these little tiny flies that buzz around the heads of sheep, And without the oil, the flies would land on the mucus part or get in their ears. I know it's so sad to think of that cute little sheep that's happening to. It'd get in their ears, and the larva would turn into these worm-like things, and the worms would make their way up to the passages through the ear canals and land in their brains. And they'd drive them crazy. And the sheep would go insane, literally. They'd bang their heads against the trees, against the rock. Sometimes they'd die because they were going so crazy and hit their heads so hard. So the shepherds would come and anoint their head with oil, because even if they had just begun to make their way in, the oil alone would change the sheep's makeup, and the bugs would stop. And isn't that just like the enemy? In Scripture, the enemy is called the father of lies, the accuser, and those lies come into our ears and make their way into our heads and into our hearts. And those bugs for us, though, look like bitterness, anger, shame, gossip, guilt, self-esteem, insecurity, fear, jealousy, comparison, impure thoughts, accusations against you. And it goes in and becomes a frustration, and it's all you can think about. I think the thing that broke my heart the most this year was that I knew that so many of you were just sitting alone in your homes with those bugs in your mind, just driving you crazy. And that's what the enemy does. He steals, he kills, and destroys. And God says, I am your shepherd. I will protect you. I will lead you unto green pasture, to the abundant life. Make your soul's home in me. A few months ago, I got really wounded in a relationship, which isn't that just the nature of relationships, right? We're all messed up. And for a few days, I went into this self-righteous religious mode, right? Like, and some of you guys, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where someone hurts you and you're like, oh yeah, you want to hurt me? Okay. And you like lift yourself up bigger in your mind. You're like, I am better than you, you know? Like, how dare you? That's kind of where I was. And I was venting to my husband about this person, and I was making them small, and I was pointing out every flaw and exaggerating it in my mind. But at the end of those few days, guess what? I didn't feel any better. Some of you know where that's right. Where you think the sin of gossip is going to make you feel better, and then you feel like death because you've ruined some relationships along the way, or even your own soul. I didn't feel any better. I just felt anxious and angry in this person's presence, and the lies of shame and anger and bitterness were driving me crazy to a place where I felt isolated. So check this out. In some places, shepherds would make dips and make the sheep go all the way through it, so that every part of them was anointed with oil, so that even when they would butt heads and sheep, lock horns, even when that happened, they were so immersed in oil, they'd slip right off, so that they couldn't hurt other sheep in the pasture. And isn't that just like God? That when we immerse ourselves so completely in Him, when we go to Him to say, God, what do you think about this person? He changes the way we think. He changed how I saw this person when I finally took it to Him. He showed me that this person was someone He died for too, and that my anger toward them was only going to burn me up inside, did nothing to that person. See, even down to our relationships as we walk with Him, the Holy Spirit changes us from the inside out. The third thing I want you to see about Jesus as the shepherd in John 10 is this. He laid down His life so that we could have it to the full. Jesus keeps going, and He contrasts Himself as the shepherd to hired hands. In verse 11, read along with me. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. Here He's talking about you and me. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock and one shepherd. And for this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I've received from my Father. See, as he's describing himself as the good shepherd, he starts talking about the hired hand and how little they cared for the sheep. And some of you are like, I don't get that. Like, what is that about? You probably do get it. You've probably had a job, right, where you've just only cared about making that money. Like, you don't really care about what you're doing. You don't really care about, like, what it's going to get you. Or you've done an activity where you've only cared that it's going to go on your application that you did this activity. You didn't actually care about that club or about that cause. You just did it to write it down. Or maybe you've had a coach like this, or a boss like this, or a leader of some kind like this, where you knew this person doesn't really care about me. They are in this for what it gives them, the next step for them, and you could feel that they didn't care. See, what this led to was when the hired hand was around the sheep and they were in danger, they would usually run off and let the sheep fend for themselves. That's not a shepherd. Or even worse, they would throw one over the wall and let it be a sacrifice for the rest. Have you guys ever watched National Geographic? Anybody in here big National Geographic fans? Okay, all right, awesome. So not me, but just wanted to know who you were. The reason why, not because I don't love animals, I do. It is because I love animals that I don't like National Geographic, actually. Because in every episode, I felt like, or it's not an episode, you guys know what I'm talking about. It was like every time an animal just died in the most gruesome way. Right? And they'd be like, and here comes the lion, and he is going to get the innocent little lamb, and you're like, not the lamb, like that thing is just chilling on the ground, right? And it doesn't matter, land, sea, or sky, somebody's dying, right? In every single scene, somebody's dying. My son actually is so much better about watching it than I am. I can barely handle it. Just like the hired hand, this is what self-righteousness will do. It'll sacrifice you to preserve itself. This is what religious people will do. They will throw you to the wolves to make themselves feel better. The moment that you stop measuring up, the moment that you mess up, you will be cut off. And this is also what rebellion and sin will do. It will lure you with the illusion that you're going to be satisfied, and then it'll leave you alone when you realize you're empty. The hired hands represent those who care about themselves more than the sheep, and Jesus is nothing like them. Notice in these verses 5 times, Jesus says, I lay down my life. See, when sin was hunting you down, when hell was hunting you down, Jesus threw himself between you and your enemies, and he was devoured so that you may escape and may live life abundantly. And that's why he says, I am the good shepherd. I am the door. Jesus says, let me willingly give up my life so that you don't have to face eternal death and hell. And he's different than any other way. He won't use his power to destroy people or use people up to spit them out. He loves us so much that he died for us. And see, just a few chapters later in John chapter 19, we see Jesus' crucifixion, his gruesome death, where he willingly laid down his life. And I think the details of this matter to us because so often this can just become a story that we hear, and especially if you're a church kid and you've grown up in church, you're like, yeah, Jesus died for me. But I think the details matter. We see the crown of thorns, a robe, and a king of the Jews claim above his head in verse 5 as a slap in the face and as a way to mock this utterly unking-like Jesus. We see the flogging where Roman soldiers strapped their victims and beat them with weapons that had little thin strips of leather, and at the end of those pieces would often be a knot, a bone, a stone, or glass, and 40 times they would rake across the backs of their victims. We see the walk to the cross in verse 7 because it wasn't enough for him to be beat and nailed to a cross. He had to walk through the center of town in front of everyone. Rome wanted every person to never forget what they saw. We see the humiliating game for his clothes in verse 23 because it wasn't enough that he was walked through town or beat. But it was often a common practice for the soldiers to throw dice to just kind of mock their victims and make fun of, oh, I'm going to take this shirt, I'm going to take that shirt, making a game of their death. We see in verse 25 a circle of onlookers, including Jesus' mother, Mary, his aunt, a family friend, and Mary Magdalene. And Luke's account tells us all who knew him stood by to watch. The same people who saw him wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger, are now watching him hang on a cross. And Jesus had been with them. He drove out demons, he shared meals with them, he laughed with them, he cried with them, he pushed against death for 6 hours. And in verse 28 through 30, Jesus says, "It is finished." And then he bows his head, gave up his spirit, and laid down his life. The line in Greek basically says he let go of his life because no one killed him. God chose that. And he is the good shepherd who gave up his life. And after 6 hours of suffering for the sin of you and me and the rest of the world, he said, "It is finished," and he let out a sigh. See, the God who had all power, who could have done anything, is the kind of God who wrapped a towel around his waist and washed the feet of his disciples, even the one that he knew was going to betray him. See, the God of all power who could have done anything compared himself to a shepherd who knows his sheep, their pain, their cries, and their names. He's the God of the entire universe, and he knows you, and he knows me. And he knows your name, he knows your pain, he knows what you've been through this year, he knows what you've endured, and he says, "I love you. I know your story. I know. And I'm going to take care of you. I will lead you. Let me be your shepherd." And so tonight, I just want to ask you 2 questions. The first is, have you entered through the door? Jesus promises that whoever enters through will be saved. And who else is there like Jesus in all of human history who sacrifices himself for you, for us? Who else can tend to our souls and our relationships and our deepest wounds? Who else can tend to our weary souls? Who can be our friend and never let us down when everyone else does? And it is Jesus. He is the door. He knows you by name. He knows your temptations, what you really want. He knows what you face, and he asks you to trust him, to let him lead you, to let him come between you and whatever is destroying you. The blood of Jesus breaks the chains of sin and separation from God, and the truth is, he did not die for everyone but you. So often we hear this story and we're like, yeah, but I don't know. No, you too. And he says, let me lead you. Let me tend to your wounded soul. Let me guard and protect you. You don't have to protect yourself anymore. You don't have to be your own boss anymore. I want to be the oil in your life so that when the enemy comes to take you out, I can stand between it, and all you have to do is come to me. The second question is he your shepherd? Really? And what I mean by that is just, is he your leader? Some of you have entered through the door, but if you're really honest, the way of Jesus is not the guiding voice of your life. The way of Jesus is so far down the list of what you think about the world, about yourself, about your relationships. And so at the beginning, I asked you, who or what is discipling you? Who is forming the way that you think? And so let me just ask you, what do you want tonight? What do you need? Right here is where whatever that need is found in Jesus. Right here is where you find the Good Shepherd and you run back to him. In him, we lack nothing. So what do you need? Do you need more joy? Do you need peace? Do you need more freedom? Do you need salvation? Jesus Christ came 2,000 years ago, not just so that you can go to heaven, but so that you can be free now. That you can live a free life of joy, of peace, of freedom, rid of anxiety, rid of the bugs that take over and destroy your mind. And he says, let me be your shepherd. Let me lead you. I want to close tonight just by reading what the Psalms write about the Lord as our shepherd. And I know that the danger of reading anything like this is that you've heard it so much you don't care. And what I just want to ask you tonight is to take off the apathy, to take off the indifference, to take off the I'm too good for this, and listen to what our Father is telling you about himself and who he is and what he can be for you when you give your life to him, when you walk through the door, and when you let him be your shepherd. If you need to close your eyes, you can do that. If you just want to sit and take this in, you can do that. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He takes me to lush pastures. He leads me to refreshing water. He restores my strength. He leads me down the right paths for the sake of his reputation, even when I must walk through the darkest valley. I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff reassure me. You prepare a feast before me in plain sight of my enemies. You refresh my head with oil. My cup is completely full. Surely, your goodness and faithfulness will pursue me all my days, and I will live in the Lord's house for the rest of my life. Jesus, you are the kind of shepherd who leaves the 99 to find the one. You come and find us, God. Thank you, Jesus, that in your name I pray that the voice of the enemy would be silenced in the ears of your children tonight. That your voice, your love would be so loud that we cannot hear anything else. God, let your truth ring in our ears, the voice of love, of grace, of forgiveness. Let it take over the bugs that have taken up residence in our hearts and minds this year. You took on hell, you took on sin, so that we may find life and find it to the full. And God, may we believe you for that tonight. May we walk through the door and follow you as our shepherd. It's in your name. Amen.